Clara Whitmore picked up her sister's wedding dress, held it against her chest, and looked at her mother with eyes that weren't crying anymore, because she had already decided. "I'll go," she said. Not because she wanted to, not because anyone asked kindly, but because Evelyn had run away in the middle of the night, and someone had to face the consequences. A stranger was waiting in Montana, a man who had paid for a bride he had never met, and Clara, plain, overlooked, unwanted Clara, was about to become someone else's replacement. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Evelyn disappeared, Clara was already awake. She was always already awake. That was the thing about Clara Whitmore that nobody ever bothered to notice. She was the one who rose before the sun, before the rooster, before anyone else in the family had even opened their eyes. While Evelyn slept with her hair spread across the pillow like something out of a painting, Clara was downstairs, her hands in cold water, scrubbing yesterday's pans clean before the day had officially started. It was June of 1887, and the Kansas summer had already decided to be ruthless. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and looked out the small kitchen window. The fields were dry. They were always dry. The Whitmore farm had been struggling for 3 years now, ever since their father's back gave out and the debt started piling up the way debt always does on land that doesn't cooperate, quietly, steadily, without mercy. She was 26 years old and had never once in her life been described as beautiful. She had heard every other word: capable, reliable, strong, hardworking. Those were the words people used when they didn't want to say plain. Those were the words that meant, "We appreciate what you do, but we don't quite see you." Clara had made her peace with that, or so she told herself. The letter from Nathan Cole had arrived 6 weeks earlier, addressed to her mother. Clara had been the one to read it aloud at the kitchen table, because her mother's eyesight had been failing, and her father's hands shook too badly to hold the page steady. She read it in a clear, even voice, the way she did everything, without drama, without performance. "I am a rancher in the Montana Territory. I have built my land for 12 years with my own hands. I am looking for a wife who understands what frontier life requires, someone willing to work, to endure, and to build something lasting. I am not a man who promises romance. I promise honesty, stability, and respect. I have spoken with your family through correspondence, and I believe we may be well matched. I would welcome Miss Evelyn Whitmore as my bride. Travel arrangements have been made. I await her arrival." When Clara finished reading, the kitchen went quiet. Then Evelyn laughed. It was a light, easy laugh, the kind that came naturally to her, the kind that had always made rooms turn toward her like flowers toward sunlight. "He sounds like he's hiring a ranch hand, not a wife," Evelyn said, reaching across the table to steal a biscuit from the basket. "Montana. Good Lord, can you imagine?" "Evelyn," their mother said quietly. "Mama, I said yes to the arrangement. I didn't say I was happy about it." Evelyn took a bite, unbothered. "But what choice do we have? The farm is failing. Nathan Cole has land and money. We need this." She looked across the table at Clara with those large, luminous eyes of hers, the eyes that people wrote poems about in their heads, even when they didn't say them out loud. Besides, Clara would have made a better rancher's wife anyway. She said it lightly, like a joke. Clara didn't laugh. The weeks that followed were a performance. Evelyn allowed herself to be fitted for a wedding dress. She sat through Sunday dinners with a smile and talked about Montana with just enough enthusiasm to satisfy their parents. She wrote polite letters to Nathan Cole, dictated to Clara, who wrote them out in careful, legible script. Letters that were warm without being intimate, agreeable without being specific. Clara wrote every word. She thought about that sometimes. Late at night, when the house was quiet and she was the last one awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a lamp burning low. She thought about the fact that Nathan Cole had been writing to Evelyn for 6 weeks, but every sentence Evelyn had ever sent him was actually Clara's sentence. Clara's thoughts. Clara's careful, considered words. She told herself it didn't matter. She was good at telling herself things didn't matter. 3 days before Evelyn was supposed to leave for Montana, Clara woke to an empty bedroom. Evelyn's side of the bed was cold. Clara sat up slowly. She already knew, the way you sometimes know things before you've gathered any evidence, that something had changed in the night. The air in the room felt different, lighter, like a held breath finally released. She found the letter on the kitchen table, weighted down by the sugar bowl. Mama, Daddy, Clara. I'm sorry. I know what this means. I know what I'm doing. But I can't go to Montana and be some stranger's ranch wife and pretend that's the life I want. Thomas asked me to go with him and I said yes. Please don't be angry. Please try to understand. I love all of you. Evelyn. Clara read it twice. Then she set it back down on the table, very carefully, and went to start the coffee. Her parents found the letter an hour later. Her mother sat down on the kitchen floor, not in a chair, on the actual floor, and put her face in her hands. Her father stood in the doorway with the letter in his shaking hands and said nothing for a long time. The kind of silence that isn't peace. The kind that's the other thing. The agreement, her father finally said. His voice was raw. The money for the travel. The arrangements. He's expecting a bride in 3 days. I know, Clara said. If we break this agreement, Nathan Cole has every right to demand the travel money back, and we don't have it. He lowered the letter. We don't have it, Clara. I know, Daddy. Her mother looked up from the floor. Her eyes were red and wet. What do we do? The kitchen was very quiet. Clara poured 3 cups of coffee and set them on the table. She sat down. She folded her hands in front of her and looked at both of her parents for a long moment. I'll go, she said. The silence that followed was the loudest silence she had ever heard. Her mother's mouth opened and closed. Her father set the letter down very slowly. Clara. The agreement has to be honored. Someone has to go. She kept her voice steady, even, the way she always did. I'm not Evelyn. He'll know that the minute he sees me. But I can explain everything when I arrive. I can tell him the truth and let him decide what he wants to do. He might send you straight back, her father said. He might. He could be furious. He has every right to be. Her mother pressed her fingers to her lips. Sweetheart, you don't have to do this. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. Mama. Clara's voice was still quiet, but something in it made her mother stop. I'm not sacrificing myself. I'm making a practical decision because someone in this family has to. She looked down at her folded hands. And if I'm being honest, if I'm being completely honest, I don't have much left here to stay for. Nobody argued with that, because they all knew it was true. The 2 days before her departure were strange and compressed, the way time gets when something irrevocable is approaching. Clara didn't try on Evelyn's wedding dress. She set it aside and packed her own things instead. Practical things. The kind of clothing that could survive work and weather. The kind of boots that would hold up on rocky ground. She packed her sewing kit, her account ledger from the farm, a small Bible that had been her grandmother's. She did not pack anything that was meant to impress. She was done with that kind of strategy. She had watched Evelyn impress people her whole life, and she had spent her own whole life being the one who held everything together after the impressions faded. If Nathan Cole was going to accept her, and she wasn't at all certain he would, he was going to accept her as she actually was. That was the only promise she made herself before she left. She would not lie. She would not pretend. Whatever happened at the other end of that journey, it would happen honestly. The train journey took 4 days. Clara had never been on a train before. She had never been more than 40 miles from the farm where she was born. The world outside the windows kept changing. Flat golden Kansas giving way to something bigger, wilder, more overwhelming than she had words for. She sat alone in her compartment with her hands folded in her lap and watched the land shift and expand. Other passengers passed through the corridor. Women traveling with husbands, children pressed against windows with wide eyes. A conductor who nodded politely each time he walked by. A woman about Clara's age who asked, somewhere in Nebraska, where she was headed. "Montana," Clara said. The woman's eyes went slightly wide. "By yourself?" "Yes." "To meet someone?" Clara paused. "To meet Yes. To meet someone." She didn't know what word to use. He wasn't her fiancé. He wasn't her future husband. He was a stranger who was expecting a different woman entirely, and she was about to show up on his doorstep with nothing but the truth and whatever she was worth. She stared out the window for the rest of the night. She arrived at the nearest town to the coal ranch on a Thursday afternoon. A ranch hand named Hector was waiting at the station, a short, weathered man with a hat that had seen better decades. He was holding a piece of paper with Miss Whitmore written on it in large, careful letters. Clara walked up to him with her bag in her hand and said, "That's me." Hector looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're Miss Evelyn Whitmore?" And there it was. The moment she had been rehearsing in her head for 4 days. She could say yes. It would be so easy to say yes. Just for now. Just long enough to get to the ranch. Long enough to meet Nathan Cole face to face. Long enough to figure out the situation before he had time to react. She could say yes and buy herself a little more time. "No," she said. Hector blinked. "I'm Clara Whitmore. Evelyn is my sister. There was a situation. I'll explain everything to Mr. Cole when I arrive, but I wanted you to know the truth from the beginning. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not." Hector stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up her bag. "Well," he said, "that's a first." The ride to the Cole ranch took almost 2 hours. Hector didn't talk much. Clara appreciated that. She wasn't in the mood for small talk. She was mentally preparing herself for the conversation she was about to have, rehearsing it the way she had rehearsed the farm accounts, checking the figures twice, making sure she hadn't missed anything. What would she say first? She went through the options. "I'm sorry. My sister ran away and I came in her place. You have every right to send me back." Or, "I know this isn't what you arranged. I know I'm not what you expected. But I'm here and I'm honest and I'd like to explain." Or, "My name is Clara. I'm not the bride you were promised. But I'm the bride who showed up, and that has to count for something." She didn't know which version she would use. She supposed it would depend on what his face looked like when he saw her. The ranch appeared through the window of the wagon, wide, sprawling, more substantial than she had imagined from the letters. There were several outbuildings, a main house that was large by frontier standards, and fields that stretched out in every direction, with the particular quiet confidence of land that had been worked by someone who knew what they were doing. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not fear exactly. Something older and quieter than fear. She recognized this place, not because she had ever been here, but because she had spent her whole life somewhere like it. Land that demanded everything you had and gave back only as much as you were willing to earn. She understood this kind of place. She just didn't know yet if that would be enough. Nathan Cole was standing outside the main house when the wagon pulled up. He was exactly what his letters suggested, and somehow more. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been shaped by weather and years of looking into distances. Not old, maybe 35, 36. But aged in the way that frontier men aged, with a quietness about him that wasn't shyness. It was something more deliberate. The quietness of a man who had learned to say only what mattered. He watched the wagon approach without moving. When Clara stepped down, she saw his eyes adjust. She watched it happen. That small recalibration behind a careful face. He had been expecting someone else. Someone he had built an image of from letters he had received, from a photograph he had probably been sent, from weeks of correspondence that Clara herself had written, but that had been signed with a different name. He looked at her. She looked at him, and before he could say a single word, Clara spoke first. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was steady. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I am Evelyn's older sister. 3 days before I was supposed to leave, Evelyn ran away with a traveling performer. She left a letter. She was not willing to come to Montana. Nathan said nothing. My family had no way to return the travel funds. The agreement was signed, and someone had to come. Clara kept her eyes on his. I want you to know clearly and immediately that I understand this is not what you arranged. I understand you expected a different woman, and I understand that you have every right, to put me back on the next train home. Still nothing. The ranch hands who had drifted close enough to hear had gone very still. Clara continued, because she had started this and she was going to finish it. I am 26 years old. I have managed a farm's accounts since I was 16. I can handle livestock. I know how to preserve food for winter, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to make decisions when a situation requires it. I am not delicate, and I am not charming, and I am not the woman you thought you were getting. She paused. But I am honest, and I thought you should know the truth before you decided anything. She stopped talking. The silence stretched. A crow called somewhere in the fields. Nathan Cole looked at her for a very long time, the kind of look that most people found uncomfortable because it wasn't polite looking, wasn't social looking. It was the look of a man who was actually trying to see something. Finally he said, "How long was the journey?" Clara blinked. Of all the things she had prepared for. 4 days, she said. You must be tired. She stopped. Yes. Come inside, Nathan said. There's food. We'll talk after you've rested. He turned and walked back toward the house. Clara stood very still for a moment, her bag in her hand, the afternoon light warm on her face. She had prepared for anger. She had prepared for rejection. She had prepared for a man who would look at her and see everything she was not. She had not prepared for this. She picked up her bag and followed him. The inside of the house was spare and clean, the kind of clean that comes not from decoration, but from discipline. Everything had a place. Nothing was wasted. There were no curtains, no rugs, no soft edges. It was a house built by a man who lived alone and had stopped trying to make it feel like anything other than what it was. A woman named May, older, sturdy, with a face like weathered kindness, brought out cold chicken and bread and a pot of strong tea without being asked. "You're the one from Kansas?" May said, setting the food down. "Yes," Clara said. "Sit down then. You look like you've been thinking too hard for 4 days straight." Clara sat. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. She ate carefully, not quickly. Years of managing limited supplies had trained her not to rush, and she listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into late afternoon. Nathan sat across the table with his own cup of tea. He didn't eat. He watched her in that same direct, unperformative way. Not rude, not aggressive, just attentive. Like a man reading a document he intended to understand. "Tell me about the farm," he said. Clara looked up. "The Whitmore farm?" "Yes." She set down her fork. She thought about it honestly, rather than reaching for the easiest version. "We had 300 acres. Good land in a wet year. Difficult land in a dry one. My father injured his back 4 years ago and was never fully right again after that. I took over the accounts at that point. We had 7 workers at our peak, down to 3 by the time I left." She paused. "We were 3 years behind on the banknotes." "And you managed all of it? The accounts?" "Yes. Without help. My father helped when he could. My mother did what she could." Clara looked at him directly. Evelyn brought other things to the family. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of something she couldn't name. What did she bring? Clara considered lying, considered softening it at least. "Hope," she said finally. "Evelyn always made everyone believe things were going to get better, even when the evidence didn't support it. That matters. That's a real skill. I could keep the accounts, but I couldn't make everyone believe." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Can you believe yourself?" he asked. Clara looked at him across the table. "I'm here," she said. "That's what believing looks like for me." That evening, Nathan told her his terms. They sat across from each other at the same kitchen table, with May conspicuously absent, and Nathan laid it out the way Clara had already understood he would. Plainly, directly, without softening. "I arranged this marriage because I need a partner," he said. "This ranch is more than one person can manage. I've tried for 12 years. The land is good, but the winters are hard, and there are decisions that need to be made faster than I can make them alone." He set his hands flat on the table. "I was not looking for a romance. I was looking for someone who could stand beside me and not break under the pressure." "I understand," Clara said. "I don't know you," he continued. "I don't know what you're actually capable of, and I don't know whether what you told me about yourself today is accurate, or whether you were trying to impress me." "I wasn't trying to impress you," Clara said, a little sharply. Nathan looked at her. "No," he said slowly. "I don't think you were." He was quiet for a moment. Then, 2 weeks. I'll give you 2 weeks to see what this life actually is. You'll work with the hands. You'll see the full operation. At the end of those 2 weeks, you decide if this is something you want, and I'll decide the same thing." Clara held very still. "And if at the end of 2 weeks, one of us decides no?" she asked. "Then I'll pay your return fare. You'll go home with enough money to help your family for a year, and we'll both say, this never happened." She looked at him for a long moment. He wasn't offering her charity. He wasn't offering her pity. He was offering her something she had almost never been offered in her 26 years on this earth. A fair chance. "All right," she said. Nathan nodded once. "May will show you to your room. We start at 5 o'clock. That night, alone in a small, clean room that smelled of cedar and open air, Clara sat on the edge of the bed with her grandmother's Bible in her lap and did not read it. She just held it. She thought about Evelyn, somewhere out there with her traveling performer, already chasing the life she had wanted. She thought about her parents in the farmhouse back in Kansas, in debt and ashamed and relieved in equal measure. She thought about Nathan Cole, who had looked at her across a kitchen table and somehow not looked through her the way most people did. She thought about what she had said. "I'm here. That's what believing looks like for me." She hadn't planned to say that. It had just come out, the truest thing, the unpolished thing, the thing she would never have said if she had been trying to perform. And he had looked at her differently after she said it. Not like someone who was settling. Not like someone who was making do. Like someone who had just recognized something he had been looking for. Clara set the Bible on the bedside table. She lay down. She stared at the ceiling in the dark for a long time, listening to the sounds of a Montana night. Bigger, wilder, more open than anything she had known. And she made herself one more promise. Not about what she would become. Not about what she hoped. Just this. She would show up tomorrow the same way she had shown up today. Honest. Practical. Real. Without decoration and without apology. And whatever Nathan Cole decided after that, at least she would know the truth of it. At least, for once in her life, someone would see her as she actually was. That had to be worth something. That had to be worth something. She closed her eyes. And outside the window, the Montana night stretched out in every direction, wider than anything she had ever known, full of things she couldn't name yet, full of a future that had no shape at all. But it was hers. For the first time in 26 years, something was actually, finally, only hers. She was awake before the 5 o'clock bell. Of course she was. Clara had been waking before bells her entire life. Her body didn't know how to sleep past the moment when darkness started thinning at the edges. When the world shifted from black to that deep, uncertain blue that meant the night was giving up. She was dressed, her hair pinned back, her boots laced, before anyone in the house made a sound. She stood in the kitchen alone and built a fire in the stove the way she had built fires her whole life, quickly, efficiently, without drama. And by the time May shuffled in half asleep at 4:45, the coffee was already made, and Clara was standing at the window with a cup in her hand, watching the ranch hands move across the yard in the early dark. May stopped in the doorway. She looked at the coffee. She looked at Clara. She looked at the stove. "Well," May said, "you're either going to be a miracle or a problem." "Probably both," Clara. May almost smiled. Almost. She poured herself a cup without another word, and they stood together in the kitchen, in the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. The comfortable quiet of two women who understood that mornings required function before conversation. That was the first thing Clara got right. She didn't know it yet, but May remembered it for a long time after. Nathan appeared at exactly 5 o'clock, not a minute before, not after. And when he walked into the kitchen and found Clara already there with coffee made, and May looking marginally more human than she usually did at that hour, something in his face shifted. Just briefly. Just enough. He poured his coffee. He looked at Clara. "You slept?" "Some," she said. "The bed?" "The bed was fine. I wake early." He nodded like that made sense to him. Like it was the kind of thing that made sense. "We start with the livestock," he said. "I'll introduce you to the operation. You don't have to do anything today. Just watch. Get a sense of what we're working with." "I'd rather work," Clara said. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You don't need to prove anything on your first morning." "I'm not trying to prove anything," she said, and she meant it. I don't learn by watching. I learn by doing. I always have. If you need me to slow down and observe, I will. But if there's work to be done and I'm standing around watching it get done, I'm going to feel useless. And feeling useless makes me worse company than I already am." Nathan was quiet for a second. Then he set down his cup. "Then let's not waste time," he said. The first person who made it clear he didn't want her. There was a ranch hand named Walt. Walt was about 50, built like a man who had wrestled difficult things for decades, with a face that had settled permanently into a kind of skeptical squint. He was Nathan's most experienced hand, 12 years on the ranch, maybe more. And he made absolutely no effort to hide what he thought about the woman standing in the middle of the yard at 5:15 in the morning, like she belonged there. "You're the replacement," he said, not a question. Clara looked at him calmly. "I'm Clara Whitmore." "Yeah." He looked her up and down, not in any offensive way, just the flat, practical assessment of a man deciding how much weight a fence post could bear. "You ever worked cattle before?" "Hogs, mostly, and horses." "Hogs." He said it like she had told him she had experience with houseplants. "And I managed a 300-acre farm's entire supply operation for 4 years, Clara added, her voice still even. "Purchasing, budgeting, seasonal planning. I know it's not cattle, but I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me work alongside you and make your own assessment." Walt stared at her. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he jerked his head toward the barn. "Come on then," he said. "Let's see what you've got." It wasn't welcome, but it was something. Clara followed him. The first morning was a test she hadn't studied for, and she knew it. Walt didn't explain things. He just did them and watched to see if she could keep up. He moved fast for a man his size, efficient in the practiced way of someone who had done the same tasks so many times they had become a kind of muscle memory. He expected her to ask for help. She didn't. When the feed had to be distributed, she distributed it. When a gate latch stuck, she worked it loose without making a fuss. When one of the younger horses spooked and pulled against its rope, Clara held on. Not elegantly, not with any skill she could claim as training, but with the pure, stubborn grip of a woman who had been holding on to difficult things her whole life, and had learned that letting go always cost more than staying. When the horse finally settled, she ran her hand along its neck and spoke to it the way she used to speak to the hogs back in Kansas. Not cooing, not baby talking, just low and steady and honest, like she was telling it something true. Walt was watching. She pretended not to notice. By mid-morning, one of the younger hands, a boy who couldn't have been more than 18, named Pete, sidled up beside her while she was checking the water troughs. "Walt doesn't let newcomers near the horses usually," he said. Clara didn't look up. "Good to know." "He let you. First morning." She looked up then. Pete had a kind, open face, the kind that hadn't learned yet to hide what it was thinking. He was looking at her with something close to admiration, which was so unfamiliar that it took her a moment to recognize it. "I didn't give him much choice," she said. Pete grinned. Yeah, I saw that. By noon, Clara's arms ached, and her back was reminding her of every hour she had spent on a train. She was hungry. She was dirty. Her hands had 2 new blisters and 1 split fingernail. She felt, somehow, better than she had in years. There was something clarifying about work that demanded everything from you, something that cut through all the noise in your head and left only the next task, the next problem, the next thing that needed doing. She had felt it on the farm, too, in the good seasons when the work was hard but meaningful. The feeling of usefulness. The feeling of mattering in a way that didn't require anyone's approval. She washed her hands at the pump and walked into the kitchen where May had set out noon food, bread and beans and cold meat, for the hands. Nathan was already inside. He was looking at some kind of ledger when she came in, and he glanced up when the door opened. He watched her cross to the pump inside the kitchen and wash her hands properly, watched her take her seat without ceremony, watched her help herself to a modest plate without waiting to be offered. "How was the morning?" he asked. "Useful," she said. "Walt didn't give you trouble?" "Walt tested me," Clara said. "That's different from giving me trouble." Something in Nathan's expression shifted again. That brief thing she was starting to recognize, like a door that opened and closed too quickly to see through. "He tests everyone," Nathan said. "I know. I've been the new person before." She took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "I passed enough of it, I think. I'll probably have to keep passing it for a while. That's fine. You're not bothered by it?" Clara put down her fork and looked at him directly, the way she had been doing since she arrived, head on, without apology. "Mr. Cole, I have been underestimated by people my entire life. People who knew me. People who loved me." She said it without bitterness, just as fact. "Walt doesn't know me. It would be strange if he trusted me on the first morning. I'd actually be more worried about a man who trusted a stranger on the first morning." Nathan held her gaze. "That's either wisdom or stubbornness," he said. "Usually both," Clara said. "In my experience." He looked at her for another moment. Then he turned back to his ledger. But she noticed he wasn't actually reading it. On the 3rd day, the real test came. Not from Walt, not from the cattle or the weather or the hard physical work. From a woman named Dora Hatch. Dora was the wife of a neighboring rancher, and she arrived at the Cole Ranch on Wednesday morning in a wagon that was much nicer than anything on Nathan's property, wearing clothes that had no business being within 20 miles of a working ranch. She was handsome and sharp-eyed and approximately 40 years old, with the particular confidence of a woman who had always been the most important person in any room she entered. She arrived to welcome the new bride. She was not prepared for Clara. Clara was in the yard working with Pete on repairing a section of fence when the wagon pulled up. She was dirty. Genuinely dirty. Not decoratively dirty. The kind of dirty that meant she had been working with her hands since 5 that morning. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, and she had a smear of something on her left sleeve that she was pretty sure was axle grease. She turned when she heard the wagon. Dora Hatch looked at her, and in the fraction of a second before Dora composed her face, Clara saw exactly what the woman thought. "You must be the Whitmore girl," Dora said, stepping down from the wagon with the practiced grace of someone who had been stepping down from wagons in nice clothes for years. "Clara Whitmore," Clara said, and did not apologize for how she looked. "I'm Dora Hatch. My husband's ranch is the next property east." She extended her hand. Clara shook it, her own hand calloused, a little gritty. Dora's expression didn't flicker again, but her fingers withdrew just slightly faster than was quite polite. "I came to introduce myself and to extend a proper welcome." "That's very kind," Clara said. "We all heard about the situation." Dora's voice was precise, deliberate. "With the original arrangement." "Yes," Clara said simply. Dora waited for more. Embarrassment, maybe. Apology. Some acknowledgement of the awkwardness. Clara offered none. "Well," Dora said, looking past her toward the house. "Is Nathan about? I'd love to say hello." "He's in the far field. Should be back by afternoon." Clara gestured toward the house. "May's inside if you'd like to wait, or leave a message." Dora looked at her for a long moment. That assessing, slightly confused look of a woman recalibrating. "You're very capable," Dora said. It was almost a compliment. "I try to be," Clara said, and she went back to the fence. Later that evening, Nathan came in from the fields to find May in the kitchen, with an expression of barely contained amusement on her face. "What happened?" he asked. "Dora Hatch came to visit," May said. Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. He and Dora had a history. Not a romantic one, but a complicated one. The kind where a woman had decided she knew what a man needed before he had decided himself. Dora had been making suggestions about Nathan's life for 3 years. Suggestions about women she knew. Suggestions about the kind of wife who would be suitable for a man of his standing. What did she... Clara handled it, May said. "What do you mean handled it?" "I mean Dora Hatch drove all the way here to see what the replacement bride was like and left looking like she'd bitten into something she didn't expect." May turned back to the stove, and there was definitely a smile on her face now. "Your Clara just kept working on that fence and let Dora talk herself into a corner. Never got flustered, never got defensive, just stood there being herself until Dora ran out of room." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "She's not my Clara," he said, automatically. "The way you say the automatic thing." May didn't say anything. She just kept stirring. That night was the first time Nathan and Clara had a real conversation, not the careful exchange of information from the first evening, not the brief, practical exchanges over noon meals and morning coffee. Something else. Something that happened because the day had been long and they were both still awake past 9 o'clock, sitting at opposite ends of the kitchen table with a lamp between them. Nathan with his ledger, Clara with the farm account book she had brought from Kansas, going over figures she probably knew by heart, but worked on anyway. "What are you calculating?" Nathan asked. Clara looked up. "I was looking at my family's debt structure. Trying to figure out if there's any way to restructure what they owe to the bank before the next payment comes due." "That's not your problem anymore." "They're my family," she said quietly. "It will always be my problem." Nathan looked at her across the table. Something about the way she said it, without complaint, without drama, just as simple fact, made him put down his pen. "How bad is it?" "Worse than they admitted to me before I left," she said. "I think Daddy was trying to protect me from the full picture." "And now that you're seeing the full picture?" "Now I'm figuring out what can be done from here." She looked up at him. "You mentioned that the ranch has a good relationship with a supplier in Billings. Do they also handle land transactions? Property notes?" Nathan stared at her. "You're trying to solve your family's debt problem from Montana. I'm trying to understand what options exist," Clara said. "There's a difference. I can't solve it tonight, but I can understand it tonight, and that's the first step." He was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, "Show me the figures." Clara looked at him. "You don't have to." "I've dealt with bad banknotes before," Nathan said. "2 of them were mine. Show me the figures." She pushed the ledger across the table. He pulled it toward him and began to read, and Clara watched his face as he went through the numbers, the slight tension between his brows, the way his eyes moved methodically down each column, the small sounds he made that weren't quite words. "This interest rate is wrong," he said after a few minutes. "I know." "Banks aren't supposed to." "I know," Clara said. "But the man who signed the note wasn't. My father trusted people he shouldn't have trusted." Nathan looked up at her. "That's not your fault," he said. "I know that too," Clara said. "But you still feel responsible." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at the table. "I always feel responsible. It's a habit I haven't managed to break." He didn't say anything for a while. He kept reading the figures. And then, carefully, he turned the ledger to a blank page and started writing. Notes, calculations, the names of people he knew, possible approaches. Clara watched him work and felt something in her chest. Do something complicated that she didn't have a word for. He was helping her. Not because she had asked. Not because there was anything in it for him. Not because of any obligation or expectation. He was just helping. because she needed it. And she realized, sitting there in the lamplight with this quiet, complicated man working through her father's ruined finances with the same focused attention he probably gave his own, she realized that she could not remember the last time someone had simply helped her. Not expected her to help them. Not needed something from her first. Just helped. She pressed her lips together and looked very carefully at a point on the wall. "Thank you," she said. "It's just numbers," Nathan said, not looking up. "It's not just numbers," Clara said. He didn't answer, but he kept working. By the end of the first week, something had shifted on the ranch. It happened quietly, the way real things always happen. Not with announcement, not with a moment you could point to later and say, "There." That was when everything changed. It happened in small accumulations. In the fact that Walt had started explaining things to her, instead of just doing them and waiting to see if she noticed. In the fact that Pete deferred to her when there was a question about supply counts, because she had reorganized the supply ledger on Thursday, and somehow it now made sense to everyone, instead of just Nathan. In the fact that May had started setting 2 cups on the table in the morning without being asked, because Clara was always there, always already working, always someone it felt natural to pour coffee for. The ranch hands didn't talk about it directly. Men like Walt didn't do that. But they'd started saying good morning to her. And in a world built on action and economy of words, that meant everything. The twist came on the 8th day. Clara had not expected it. She had been so focused on the trial period, on proving herself day by day, on managing the practical reality of the ranch and the complicated reality of her own feelings about it, that she had completely stopped bracing for the thing that was actually coming. She was in the supply room, reorganizing the grain counts, when she heard the sound of an unfamiliar wagon in the yard. She didn't think much of it. Deliveries came irregularly, and she had already learned the rhythm of the ranch well enough to identify the sounds of routine. Then she heard Nathan's voice, and another voice. And the quality of Nathan's voice changed. She knew that change. She had heard it before, on the train, in towns, when something unexpected arrived. The tightening. The careful control of a man who did not want to show what he was feeling. She set down her clipboard and walked to the doorway. A woman was stepping down from the wagon in the yard. Elegant. Dark-haired. Perhaps 30 years old, in clothes that were practical, but much finer than anything Clara owned. She was beautiful in the way that Clara had spent her whole life standing next to. The kind of beauty that made rooms rearrange themselves without anyone deciding to. The woman looked at Nathan, and her face did the thing that Clara recognized even from 20 feet away. She still loved him. Nathan stood very still. "Virginia," he said, just the name, flat, like a door closing. "I heard you were getting married," the woman said. "I thought I should—" "You shouldn't have come," Nathan said. "Nathan, this isn't the right time." His voice was controlled, careful, the voice of a man who had practiced this particular restraint. Virginia looked past Nathan then, looked at Clara in the doorway. And Clara, for the first time since she had arrived in Montana, felt genuinely uncertain. She didn't move. She didn't step forward, and she didn't step back. She stood in the doorway of the supply room with her clipboard in her hands, and she looked at the woman who had clearly, once, meant something significant to Nathan Cole. And she felt the shape of something she hadn't let herself feel before. She felt, for the first time, like she wanted to stay. Not because she had to. Not because of the agreement. Not because of her family's debt. Not because of any practical calculation. Because something in the last 8 days had quietly, without her permission, started to feel like hers. And now a woman from Nathan's past had arrived to remind everyone that the story here was more complicated than a 2-week trial. Nathan turned and looked at Clara. Their eyes met across the yard, and what he did next was the thing Clara would think about later, in the small hours of the night, when the ranch was quiet and the weight of everything was heaviest. He walked away from Virginia. He walked across the yard toward Clara. "Come and help me check the east fence line," he said. His voice was even. He handed her a spare work glove he had been holding. "I need a second opinion on the tension." Clara looked at the glove. She looked at him. She looked, Just once, briefly, at Virginia, who was standing by her wagon with an expression that Clara couldn't fully read. Then she took the glove. "All right," she said. They walked together toward the east field, and neither of them spoke until the sound of the wagon in the yard was well behind them. Then Nathan said, "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," Clara said. "We're still in the trial period." "Clara." She stopped walking. He stopped too. They stood in the open air, away from every ear on the ranch, and Nathan looked at her with the most unguarded expression she had yet seen on his face. "Virginia was someone I thought I would marry," he said. 3 years ago. She decided Montana was too hard and too lonely, and she went back east." He said it quietly, without obvious pain, but in the way of something that had been painful long enough to scar over. "I arranged this marriage because I decided I needed to stop waiting for a person to choose this life. I needed someone who already understood it." Clara was quiet for a moment. "And now she's back," she said. "She's back," Nathan confirmed. "What does she want?" "I don't know yet." "What do you want?" Clara asked. He looked at her. And the answer wasn't in words. It was in the fact that he was standing here, in this field, with her, that he had walked away from the yard, from Virginia, from the complicated gravity of his own history, to stand here, with her. "I want to finish the trial period," he said finally. "And I want to see what we are at the end of it." Clara held his gaze for a long moment. "Okay," she said. She put on the work glove. "Let's look at the fence," she said. Virginia stayed in town for 3 days. Clara knew because May told her, in the tone of a woman who had opinions she was choosing not to fully express. She knew because some of the hands got slightly quieter when she walked past, the way people get quieter when they know something they think you should know but aren't sure it's their place to say. She knew because Nathan rode into town once during those 3 days and came back with a face that had been closed down tight, the way a house closes up before a storm. She didn't ask. She kept working. She fixed a problem with the water distribution that had apparently been causing arguments between 2 of the ranch hands for months. She reorganized the monthly supply order and found a way to save nearly 20% on feed costs by renegotiating with a different supplier 2 towns over. A supplier she had found in an old ledger, a name Nathan had apparently forgotten about. When she showed him the numbers, he looked at the page for a long time. "How did you find this?" he asked. "The 1884 ledger," she said. "You used them for 2 years and then stopped. I wasn't sure why, so I wrote them a letter and got a current quote." "You wrote them a letter?" "Yes." "When?" "Tuesday evening," she said. "May helped me find the paper." He looked up from the numbers and looked at her directly. "Clara," he said. "The savings aren't dramatic individually," she said quickly. "But over a full year they—" "Clara." Firmer. She stopped. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "That's not— You're not here to reorganize my business." "I know," she said. "But I was looking at the numbers and I saw the problem and I knew I could find a solution, so I—" She stopped herself, took a breath. "I'm sorry. I overstepped." "That's not what I meant," Nathan said. She looked at him. "I meant that you didn't have to do that," he said, more carefully, "because it was far beyond what anyone could have expected. And I want you to know I see it." The words landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. "I want you to know I see it. Not good work, not well done. Not the practical acknowledgement of something useful done. I see it." Clara looked away. She looked at a point on the wall and pressed her lips together and did not let herself do the thing she very much wanted to do, which was to sit down on the nearest chair and put her face in her hands and cry for approximately the first time since she had left Kansas. "It was just numbers," she said. Her voice was almost steady. Nathan was quiet. "It's not just numbers," he said. She looked at him. He was looking back at her. And she recognized her own words coming back, the ones she had said to him over her father's ledger, a week ago, in the lamplight. He had been listening. He had been listening to everything. On the 10th day, Virginia left town. May reported this with the satisfying brevity of a woman who had been hoping for exactly this outcome. Nathan said nothing about it. He didn't need to. That evening, he and Clara sat at this kitchen table again, later than usual, the lamp burning lower than usual. And they talked. Not about the ranch, not about numbers, not about anything practical. They talked the way people do when the walls have been coming down for 10 days, and neither of them has said so out loud yet. He told her about the first winter he spent on this ranch alone, when a storm came in so fast there was no time to prepare, and he spent 3 days keeping a single fire going and talking to his horse, because the silence was otherwise unbearable. She told him about the summer her father's back first gave out, how she woke up that morning and understood, without anyone telling her, that she was now the one who would have to hold everything together. How she had walked out to the field alone and stood there for a few minutes, just breathing, and then walked back in and started working. "How old were you?" Nathan asked. 22, she said. "That's too young for that kind of weight." "Probably," she said. "But I didn't have an alternative." "Did anyone help?" "Evelyn made everyone feel better," Clara said. "That helped." She said it with no bitterness now, just truth. "And neighbors brought food for a while. People are kind in practical moments. It's the long middle part that gets lonely." "The long middle part," he repeated. "When the crisis is over and everyone goes back to their own lives and you're still managing the consequences. That's the part nobody stays for." Nathan was looking at her with that expression she had been trying to decode since the first day, the one she couldn't quite name. "I stay," he said quietly. Clara looked at him. "It's the thing I'm best at," he said. "Not the exciting moments, not the rescues, just staying, showing up, being there in the long middle part." She held his gaze across the table in the low lamplight and understood something she hadn't known she was understanding until the moment it was already understood. I wasn't just telling her about himself. He was telling her what he was offering. She pressed her lips together and looked down at the table. "We still have 4 days left of the trial," she said. "I know," Nathan said. "A lot can happen in 4 days." "I know that too." She looked back up at him. He was still watching her, patient, steady, the way he watched everything, like someone who had learned that what matters most usually reveals itself to people willing to wait for it. "I don't want to make a decision in a kitchen in the middle of the night when I'm tired and emotional," she said, and her voice was almost exactly steady. "That's fair," he said. She pushed back from the table. She stood up. She picked up her grandmother's Bible from where she'd left it on the corner shelf. She'd fallen into the habit of bringing it downstairs, and it had become a kind of silent, familiar presence in the kitchen at night. She turned to go. Then she stopped. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "When Virginia came, you walked away." He said nothing. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Explain yourself to me. Or make any kind of statement. We were still in the trial period. You didn't owe me that." A beat of silence. "No," he said. "I didn't." She stood there for a moment with his voice behind her and the lamp throwing soft shadows across everything. "Thank you," she said. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the Montana night and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that the trial period was not really what either of them was counting down anymore. The trial period was something they were both already past. They just hadn't said it yet. 4 days left. 4 days to finish becoming what they were already becoming. She closed her eyes and held her grandmother's Bible to her chest, and for the first time since she had left Kansas, she didn't think about going back. The 4 days didn't go the way either of them expected. On the 11th morning, Clara woke to a sound she didn't recognize at first. A low, distant pressure in the air, like the world inhaling before it said something loud. She had heard storms in Kansas her whole life. She knew the difference between a storm that passed and a storm that meant something. She lay still in the dark for 30 seconds, listening, and then she was out of bed and dressed before she had consciously decided to move. She came downstairs to find Nathan already standing at the front door, not moving, just listening the same way she had been listening upstairs. He heard her come down. He didn't turn around. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad," he said. "Bad. Maybe the worst we've had this early in the season. Clara stood beside him at the door. Neither of them opened it yet. They just stood there, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating off him. The tight, controlled tension of a man running calculations in his head, fast. "The cattle in the upper valley," she said. "Yes." "How many?" 43 head. "If we lose them in a storm like this?" He stopped. He didn't need to finish. She had already done the arithmetic in her head. 43 head of cattle was the difference between a profitable year and a year that put everything at risk. She had been looking at his ledgers for 11 days. She knew exactly what those animals were worth and exactly what losing them would cost. "When does it hit?" she asked. 2 hours, maybe less. "Then we need to move now," Clara said. Nathan turned and looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he had been looking at her since the first day. That direct, unperformative attention. And she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not doubt, exactly. Concern. For her specifically. "Clara." "Don't," she said quietly. "This isn't a fence repair," he said. "This is a mountain storm in terrain you don't know yet. People get hurt. People get—" "Nathan." She kept her voice steady. "I have been in 3 tornadoes on a flat Kansas farm with nothing to shelter behind except a root cellar that leaked. I know what bad weather costs. I know what it costs not to move when you should." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you I'm coming. So let's stop using the time we don't have." The kitchen went very quiet. Then Nathan said, "May, we'll need the emergency kit." May, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway at some point in the last 2 minutes with the silent efficiency of a woman who had learned to anticipate crisis, was already reaching for the shelf. "Already pulling it," May said. They moved in under an hour. Nathan, Clara, Walt, Pete, and 2 other hands named Ruiz and Calloway. 6 people against a Montana mountain storm, and 43 cattle that didn't know they were in danger yet. Nathan had given clear, rapid instructions in the yard before they set out, the way he always spoke when something mattered. No wasted words, no repetition, no room for misunderstanding. Walt had looked at Clara when Nathan gave her the flank assignment, the position that required the most independent judgment, reading the cattle's movement and adjusting without being told. She had seen the flicker of doubt on his face. The old doubt. The first morning doubt she thought she had already put to rest. She said nothing. She just mounted and moved to position. And Walt, after a moment's hesitation, went to his. The first mile was hard. The second mile was harder. The air had that particular sharp quality that meant the storm wasn't 2 hours away anymore. It was closer, moving faster than Nathan's estimate, the way bad things always move faster than you think they will. She could feel it in the horse beneath her, in the way the animal's ears kept flattening and rotating, the nervous intelligence of a creature that knew something was coming. "How are you doing?" Pete called across to her. "Riding," she called back. Pete laughed, a quick, surprised laugh that sounded like relief, like her steadiness was giving him permission to be steady too. She filed that away. She had noticed it before, on the farm back in Kansas, that when she didn't panic, other people found it easier not to panic. She didn't know if that was something in her or just something in people, the way calm spread the same way fear did, by proximity and example. She decided it didn't matter which. She just kept riding. They reached the upper valley in 40 minutes. The cattle were agitated, already feeling what was coming, already moving in that restless, directionless way that livestock moved when their instincts were firing, but they had nowhere to direct the energy. Nathan moved through them with the practiced ease of 12 years, reading the herd the way Clara read ledger columns, pattern recognition, anomaly detection, immediate response. "We need to split them," he called out. "2 groups, move them down the east side. Walt, take Ruiz on the left. Calloway, you're with me on the right. Pete." "I've got the stragglers," Pete said. He had clearly done this before. "Clara." Nathan rode close enough that she could see his face clearly. "I need you on the south point. If any of them break south, they'll hit the ravine, you understand? Don't let them hit the ravine. She understood exactly what he was asking. The south point wasn't a comfortable position. It was exposed, it required constant attention, and it meant that if the herd panicked and moved wrong, she would be the thing standing between 43 cattle and a potentially fatal drop. "I've got it," she said. He held her gaze for one beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then he turned his horse and moved. For 40 minutes, it was controlled chaos. Clara held the south point and kept her eyes moving constantly. On the cattle, on the sky, on the position of every other rider, on the direction of the wind, which was shifting in the way wind shifts before a storm takes full command of the air. She wasn't thinking. She was operating on something below thought. The pure responsiveness of a person who has spent years managing crisis by reading signals and acting before the conscious mind gets involved. 3 times, cattle broke toward her position. 3 times, she moved to cut them off. Not dramatically, not with the practiced elegance of an experienced ranch hand, but with the raw spatial intelligence of someone who understood how moving creatures thought and what space they needed and how to make them choose a different direction without triggering the panic that would make everything worse. Walt saw the second one. She caught a glimpse of his face across the herd, and the expression on it, brief, involuntary, was something she hadn't seen aimed at her before. Respect. Clean, uncomplicated respect. The storm hit when they were halfway down. Not a gradual intensification. A wall. Sound first. A pressure change that made Clara's ears pop and her horse stagger sideways. And then the wind, enormous and immediate, and then rain that was almost horizontal and so cold it was nearly ice. The herd panicked. Cheque. Everything happened fast. The herd surged. Not all together, in the organized way they had been moving, but in pieces. Different animals responding to the same terror in different directions. Clara felt, rather than heard, Nathan shouting something behind her. The wind took the words before they reached her. And she didn't look back. She didn't have time to look back. 2 cattle broke south. She went after them. Her horse was scared. She could feel it in every muscle beneath her. The animal's desperate desire to turn away from the storm and run. And she did the thing she had learned to do with frightened horses on the farm. She didn't fight it. She leaned into the horse fight it. She leaned into the horse's movement and redirected it, using the animal's own energy instead of opposing it, steering with her weight and her legs and the small, constant reassurance of her own steadiness. She caught the first animal at the edge of the ravine, 30 feet, maybe 25. That's how close. She drove it back with controlled aggression, placing herself between the animal and the drop, and the cattle's flight instinct finally won out over its panic in the right direction. It moved away from the edge, back into the body of the herd. The second one was already past her. She heard Pete before she saw him. Hooves, then shouting, then the rapid movement of someone coming in fast from the east. Pete came around the right side of the second animal at a speed that made Clara's stomach drop, because the ground near the ravine was wet now and uncertain, and if his horse lost its footing. But it didn't. Pete drove the cattle back from the edge and kept going, kept it moving, kept his body between the animal and the drop until they were far enough from the ravine that the crisis passed. He looked at Clara across the distance between them. His hat was gone. His face was soaked. He was breathing hard. He raised one hand, a gesture that wasn't quite a wave, more like a signal. "We're good." She raised hers back. Then she turned her horse and went back to work. The twist came from behind. She heard it before she saw it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm, didn't belong to the cattle. A heavy sound of something falling, a man's voice cut short. She turned. Calloway was on the ground. His horse had lost its footing in the mud and gone down, and Calloway had gone with it. The horse had regained its feet and moved away. Horses almost always did. But Calloway was still down, and from the angle of him, the way he was holding his right arm against his body, something was wrong. Nathan was on the far side of the herd. Walt was 30 yards away and hadn't seen it. Pete was still managing the south edge. Clara was the closest person. She didn't wait. She reached Calloway in seconds and swung down from her horse before it had fully stopped, landing hard and keeping her footing through sheer stubbornness, the mud pulling at her boots. She got down beside him. "Calloway, look at me." He was conscious, which was the most important thing. His face was white-gray with pain and shock, but his eyes were open and tracking. "My arm," he said through gritted teeth. "I see it." She didn't touch the arm yet. She ran her eyes over the rest of him first, the way her grandmother had taught her, years ago, when there was no doctor within 20 miles, and you had to learn to assess before you acted. "Anywhere else? Your head? Your back?" "No, just the arm. I think it's broken," she said. "Yes, I think so too." She looked up, assessed their position, made a fast calculation. "I'm going to get you out of the direct path of the herd. Then I'm going to immobilize it. Then we're going to wait for Nathan to get to us. Do you understand?" "Yeah." His jaw was set tight. "Yeah, I understand." "This is going to hurt." "Lady, it already hurts." "It's going to hurt more," she said. "Ready?" He nodded once, sharp. She got him up. It took everything she had. He was a big man, and he couldn't use his right arm, and the ground was treacherous, and the storm was still doing its absolute worst around them. She got him up by getting herself under his left side and lifting with her legs the way you lifted anything heavy, the way you didn't have a choice but to lift it. High made a sound when he came vertical. A sound she would remember for a long time. The kind of sound men make when they've run out of the energy to conceal pain. "I've got you," she said into the wind. "I've got you. Walk." He walked. Unsteady, white-faced, jaw clamped shut. She kept his weight distributed so the broken arm moved as little as possible and kept them both moving away from the cattle's path and toward a cluster of large rocks that would break the wind. She got him there. She got him seated against the rock. She stripped off her outer jacket without thinking and wrapped it around his shoulders, because shock made people cold, and cold made shock worse. Then she looked at her supplies, what she had, what she could use, and did what she had always done when resources were limited. She improvised. She used 2 pieces of wood from a broken fence post she found nearby, and her spare neckcloth, and the belt from Calloway's own coat, and she built a field splint that was rough and inelegant and exactly as effective as it needed to be. Calloway watched her work with the particular focused attention of a man concentrating on something other than pain. "Where'd you learn that?" he said through his teeth. "Kansas," she said. "We were a long way from doctors. You do this kind of thing a lot?" "Often enough." She tied off the last knot, checked the tension. "How does that feel?" "Like my arm is broken," he said. "That's correct," she said. "But better or worse than before?" A beat. "Better." "Good." She sat back on her heels and looked at him steadily. "Nathan will come when the herd is settled. You're going to be okay." "Yeah." He looked at her, really looked, in the direct, assessing way of a man reconsidering something. "You know what, Miss Whitmore? You're all right." She almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly, characteristically understated that it caught her off guard. "Thank you, Calloway," she said. "You're all right, too." Nathan found them 18 minutes later. The herd was mostly down the valley by then, Walt and Ruiz managing the last of it, the storm beginning its slow, grudging retreat. Nathan came around the rock and stopped. He took in Calloway, seated, pale, immobilized arm, Clara's jacket around his shoulders. He took in Clara, kneeling on the wet ground beside the injured man, her own shirt soaked, her hair entirely free from its pins and flattened against her neck, completely unconcerned with any of it. He said her name, not Miss Whitmore, her name. Clara. She looked up. She saw his face do something complicated. The face of a man who had been carrying a fear for the last 18 minutes that he was now having to set down, and the setting down was almost harder than the carrying. "We're okay," she said. "Calloway has a break in the right forearm, probably clean. He needs a doctor when we're down. The splint will hold until then." Nathan was still looking at her. "Clara," he said again, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before, something rougher. "Nathan!" She stood up. Her knees ached. Her hands were numb from cold. She was aware, distantly, of the fact that she was in a state that Evelyn would have found mortifying. "I'm fine. I did what needed doing. Can we get Calloway onto a horse and start moving? He needs to be warm." Nathan didn't answer immediately. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and did something she hadn't seen coming. He put his hand on her face. Just briefly. Just his palm against her cold cheek. Checking. She understood immediately it was checking. Not a gesture, not a moment. Just a man who needed to verify with his own hands that she was real and intact and here. She stood very still. "Okay," he said quietly. He lowered his hand. "Let's get moving." The ride back down was slower. Calloway was on Nathan's horse, Nathan walking beside him, one hand on the bridle. Clara rode on the other side, monitoring Calloway's color and his level of consciousness, because shock was the thing you watched for after the immediate crisis. The delayed response, the slow collapse that came after the adrenaline dropped. Walt rode up alongside her at some point during the descent. He didn't say anything for a moment, just rode beside her. Then, "That was good work," he said. "Back there, with Calloway." "Thank you, Clara." Another silence. "When I first saw you," Walt said, "I thought, no offense, Miss Whitmore, but I thought you'd be gone in a week." "I know," she said. "You're not what I expected." "I'm not what anyone expected," Clara said, "including myself." Walt made a sound. Something that was probably the closest he came to a laugh. "Yeah, well," he paused. "I was wrong. I wanted you to know I was wrong." Clara looked at him sideways. Walt was not a man who said that kind of thing easily. She could tell from the effort it cost him, the way his jaw had worked before the words came out, the stiff precision of a man who didn't apologize often, but when he did, meant it completely. "Walt," she said, "you gave me a fair chance on the first morning, even though you didn't believe in me. That's more than a lot of people do." He looked at her. "I respect that more than a welcome," she said. He turned back to the path ahead. But something in his posture had shifted. Settled. Like a man who had put something down. Back at the ranch, May had the fire going and hot food ready before they were fully through the door. May, who had probably known this was coming before any of them. May, who had been quietly holding the center of this ranch for years, with the same unacknowledged competence Clara understood down to the bone. The doctor came from town within 2 hours. Calloway's arm was set and properly splinted, and he bore the process with the dignified stoicism of a man who had been through worse and had made his peace with pain as a regular feature of this life. When the doctor left, Nathan came looking for Clara. He found her in the supply room, where she always ended up eventually, when the crisis was over and the work of the aftermath began. She was going through the inventory of what they had lost or damaged in the storm, making careful notes in her ledger, her face calm and focused. She didn't hear him come in. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. He watched her add a column, check her arithmetic, make a small note in the margin. He watched the absolute concentration of her, the way nothing about her performance changed whether or not anyone was watching. She was not working to be seen working, she was just working. He thought about the moment by the ravine, the second animal, almost past her, 20 feet from a drop that would have killed it. The speed of her decision, the absence of hesitation. He thought about Calloway on the ground and the splint made from fence posts and a belt, the field dressing that the doctor had examined and pronounced entirely sound. He thought about the way she had looked when he found her, soaked, cold, kneeling on wet ground beside an injured man, his jacket around someone else's shoulders without a second thought. He thought about what he had felt in the 18 minutes between losing sight of her in the storm and finding her behind that rock. He didn't have comfortable words for it. He stepped into the room. Clara looked up. "Inventory," she said. "We lost some fencing supplies in the upper valley, and one of the medical kit cases is damaged. I'm listing what needs to be replaced. I can have an order ready to go into town by Friday." Nathan leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. She waited. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You're looking at me like I have something on my face." "You do," he said. "Mud. 3 different places." She touched her cheek, slightly self-conscious. The first time he had seen her look anything close to self-conscious since she arrived. Then she seemed to decide it wasn't worth worrying about and lowered her hand. "The inventory," she started. "Clara," he said, "stop working for a minute." She stopped. She looked at him. The pencil in her hand was still. Nathan pushed away from the doorframe and crossed to the work table and pulled out the stool beside her and sat down on it. Close. Closer than the practical distance required. She didn't move away. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay," she said. Her voice was careful. "When the storm hit and I lost track of where you were." He stopped. He looked at his hands, which were clasped on the table in front of him, and he seemed to be deciding something. Then he looked back up. "I've been on this ranch for 12 years. I've been through 6 major storms, a drought that nearly killed everything, a winter that did kill a third of my herd. I've been through all of it." He paused. "I've never been as scared as I was in those 18 minutes when I didn't know where you were." The supply room was very quiet. Clara looked at him. Her face was still, but her eyes were not. That shouldn't have happened in 11 days, he said. "I know that. I know it doesn't make rational sense, and I'm not trying to make it into something it's not. But I'm a man who respects honesty, and so I'm being honest with you. Something has changed in 11 days, and I don't know exactly what to do with that, except to say it out loud." Clara set down her pencil. She was quiet for a long moment. "Nathan," she said. "Yes. Can I be honest with you too?" "I'd be disappointed if you weren't," he said. She looked at him directly, that head-on, undecorated look that had been the first thing he noticed about her. "I came here expecting to stay 2 weeks and go home," she said. "I came here because my family needed me to, and because there was no one else. I didn't come here hoping for anything." She paused. "But somewhere in the last 11 days, this place—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together, started again. "I've spent my whole life taking care of things that belong to other people. The farm, the accounts, my family. I've never had something that was mine. Something I built, or chose, or—" She stopped again. Nathan waited. He was very good at waiting. "I don't want to leave," she said finally. The words were quiet, simple, as undecorated as everything she said. "Not because of the agreement. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I don't want to leave because I don't want to leave. Because this—" She gestured at the supply room, the ranch beyond it, the entire world that had become real to her in 11 days. "Because this feels like something I was supposed to find." Silence. Then Nathan said, "We have 3 more days in the trial period." "I know," she said. "A lot can happen in 3 days," he said. Her own words, from 10 days ago, turned and handed back. Clara almost smiled. Almost. "A lot already has," she said. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not dramatically, not with any performance of tenderness. Just his hand, large and weathered, placed over her cold, calloused, mud-stained hand. Still. Steady. The way he did everything. Clara looked down at it. She turned her hand over and held his. 3 more days, she said. 3 more days, he agreed. Neither of them moved for a while. Outside, the storm was finished. The ranch was settling back into its ordinary sounds. The livestock. The wind through the boards. May clattering something in the kitchen with the comfortable authority of a woman who had decided the crisis was over and dinner was now the priority. 3 more days of the trial period. But the truth was simpler and more inevitable than any trial. Clara Whitmore had already decided. She had decided somewhere between the ravine and the rock, in the 18 minutes Nathan spent not knowing where she was, while she held an injured man's weight and kept him warm and did what needed doing because she was the person there and the work needed doing. She had decided the way she had decided everything important in her life. Not with fanfare, not with a moment she could point to, but with the quiet, irrevocable certainty of someone who had stopped running the calculation because the answer was already clear. She was staying. Not because she had to, because she was already home. The 3 days after the storm were the quietest and most important days of Clara's life. Not because nothing happened. Things happened. The ranch didn't stop for feelings, and there was significant cleanup after the storm. Fence repairs across 3 sections, a supply inventory to reconcile, an order to place with the billing supplier she had negotiated with. Life on the coal ranch had no patience for stillness, and Clara had learned in 12 days to match its rhythm without complaint. But something had shifted in the air between her and Nathan, and they were both aware of it, and neither of them pushed it. They moved around each other with the careful attentiveness of 2 people who have said something important and are giving the words room to settle. Like you do with a new joint in a fence, you don't put full weight on it the first day. You give it time to set. Walt noticed. I didn't say anything about it, but Clara caught the way his eyes moved between them at the morning work assignments, the slight adjustment in his expression that meant he was filing something away. Walt was a man who paid attention to the things that mattered and said nothing about them until he had something worth saying. Pete noticed too, and was considerably less subtle. He looked for you the whole storm, Pete told her, falling into step beside her on the way to the barn on the 12th morning. Nathan, I saw him. He kept looking back toward where you were supposed to be. Clara kept walking. People look for their people in a storm. That's just sense. His people, Pete said, emphasizing it in a way that made Clara glance sideways at him. Yeah, that's kind of my point. She didn't answer, but she felt it, the small, complicated warmth of the observation, and she carried it with her into the barn and set it carefully somewhere she could look at later. On the 13th day, a letter arrived from Kansas. May brought it to Clara at the kitchen table after breakfast, setting it down beside her coffee with a look that Clara had learned to read in 2 weeks. The look that said May knew something she wasn't going to say, and that whatever it was, Clara was going to have to sit with it. Clara looked at the handwriting on the envelope. Her mother. She opened it. Her mother's handwriting was shakier than she remembered. Her eyesight getting worse, the pen pressing too hard the way it did when someone was concentrating with everything they had. Clara read it slowly, because reading her mother's handwriting always required patience. My dear Clara, your father and I pray for you every day. We hope Montana is treating you well and that the situation has resolved itself with kindness. We heard from Evelyn. She is in Denver. She sounds happy. I don't know what to feel about that. Your father's back has been worse this week. The bank sent another letter. Clara, I don't know what we will do. I miss you every morning. I miss the sound of you in the kitchen before anyone else is awake. The house is very quiet. I hope you are not lonely. I hope the rancher is a good man. Your father says to tell you he is proud of you. He couldn't write it himself. You know how he is. With all my love, Mama. Clara set the letter down on the table. She sat very still for a moment. She thought about the kitchen in Kansas, the cracked window pane over the sink, the particular sound of the floorboard by the door, the smell of the place that was made up of decades of living and cooking and struggling and holding on. She thought about her mother sitting at that table with shaking hands and failing eyes, writing this letter in the evening quiet. She thought about her father, who could not write what he felt, and so had sent the message through her mother, which was the closest he knew how to get. She thought about the bank letter, and then she made a decision. She picked up the letter, folded it carefully, and went to find Nathan. How was in the field? Always in the field when the weather was right, moving through the work of the ranch with the tireless, methodical attention of a man who had built this place from the ground up and checked every inch of it regularly to make sure it was still sound. She found him checking a section of the fence she had helped repair 2 days ago, running his hand along the new wire the way you checked your own work when the stakes were real. The repair held, she said, coming to stand beside him. It did, he said. Good tension. I had a good teacher. He looked at her sideways. She was holding the letter. He noticed. "From home?" he said. "From my mother." She paused. "The bank sent another letter. I think the situation is worse than I knew before I left." "How bad?" She told him the numbers she had been calculating since she read her mother's words. The shortfall, the penalty interest that had been accumulating, the timeline before the bank's patience would run out entirely. She told him plainly, the way she told him everything, because she had never once in 13 days softened reality for him, and she wasn't going to start now. Nathan listened with his full attention, not the polite listening that people performed while preparing their own response, but the real kind, the kind that meant he was taking in what she said and actually processing it before speaking. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You've been carrying this the whole time," he said. "I've been managing it," she said. The distinction mattered to her. What would it take to clear the note? She looked at him. "Nathan, what would it take?" he said. Not a question anymore. A direct request for the number. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she told him. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He said, "I can arrange that." Clara opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "You are not responsible for my family's debt," she said. "I'm aware of that. This isn't what the agreement was about. You didn't sign on to rescue the Whitmore farm. I'm not asking you to do that." "I know you're not asking," he said. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do." She stared at him. "Why?" Nathan looked at her for a moment with that direct, unperformative attention that still, 13 days in, made her want to look away even though she never did. "Because they're your family," he said. "And you have spent your entire life holding them together at cost to yourself. And if I have the ability to remove that weight from you, I'm going to do it." He paused. "Not as a transaction. Not as part of any agreement. Because you deserve to have something done for you by someone who has the means to do it." Clara held very still. "People don't do that," she said. "Some people do," Nathan said. She looked at him and felt something she had been keeping very carefully contained for 13 days push against its container with considerably more force than she was prepared for. "I'm not a charity case," she said, and her voice came out slightly more uneven than she intended. "No," Nathan said. "You're the woman who saved 43 cattle and kept one of my best hands from going into shock, and in your spare time reorganized my entire supply operation and found me a 20% cost saving I should have found 3 years ago. The last thing you are is a charity case." A beat of silence. "But you're also someone who takes care of everyone else first," he said, quieter now. "And I don't think anyone has ever taken care of you first. And I would like to do that, if you'll let me." Clara looked at the fence line for a moment. She pressed her lips together. She looked back at him. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Just okay." Nathan nodded once. "I'll write to the bank this afternoon," he said. He turned back to the fence. Clara stood beside him. After a moment, she reached out and tested the wire tension herself. Not because it needed testing, because he had already done it, and it was fine, but because standing there with her hands doing something familiar made it easier to contain what was happening in her chest. They worked the fence line for another hour without talking much, and it was the most comfortable hour Clara could ever remember. The 14th day arrived like any other day on the ranch. 5 o'clock, cold air, the particular quiet of a world not yet awake, the smell of coffee that Clara made before anyone else was downstairs. She stood at the kitchen window with her cup. 2 weeks. It had been exactly 2 weeks since she stood in this same kitchen at this same window on her first morning, watching the ranch hands move in the dark and wondering if she had made the worst or the best decision of her life. She thought about who she had been 14 days ago. The woman who stepped off the wagon with her bag in her hand and her heart steadied and her jaw set, who had stood in front of a stranger and told him the truth before he could ask for it, who had come with nothing except her own ability and her own honesty and the stubborn, quiet conviction that those two things were worth something, even when no one around her seemed to agree. She thought about what had been built in 14 days, not just between her and Nathan, but inside herself. She had stopped, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, waiting for permission to belong here. She had just belonged. The way you belonged to a place that asked everything from you and gave back exactly what you put in. The way you belonged to work that was hard and real and never finished. The way you belonged to people who had stopped looking at you like a question and started looking at you like a fact. May came into the kitchen. She looked at Clara at the window. She looked at the coffee already made. She poured herself a cup. 2 weeks, May said. Yes, Clara said. You know what he's going to ask you today. Clara looked at her sideways. You don't know that. I've known Nathan Cole for 9 years, May said, with the serene confidence of a woman holding all the information. I know exactly what he's going to do today. She sipped her coffee. The question is, what you're going to say. You know what I'm going to say too, Clara said. May smiled. A real smile. Wide and warm and completely unguarded, the first one Clara had seen from her that wasn't partially obscured by something else. Yeah, May said. I do. The twist. Clara hadn't prepared for arrived at 9 o'clock in the morning. She was in the yard when she heard the sound of another wagon, unfamiliar rhythm, different horse, and turned to see who it was. For one disorienting second, she thought she was seeing something her tired mind had constructed, because the person stepping down from the wagon couldn't be who she looked like. Couldn't be. But she was. Evelyn Whitmore stood in the yard of the Cole Ranch in a dress that was slightly travel-worn and a hat that had seen better days, and she looked at Clara with an expression that Clara had never seen on her sister's face before. She looked ashamed. Evie, Clara said. The name came out without planning. Just came out. Clara. Evelyn's voice was smaller than usual. She had always had a voice that filled rooms. Right now, it barely filled the space between them. Clara crossed the yard. She stopped 3 feet away from her sister and looked at her. Really looked, the way she hadn't had the chance to look since she found the letter in the kitchen back in Kansas. Evelyn looked tired. She looked like someone who had been running hard and had finally stopped and had not yet decided what to do with the stillness. What are you doing here? Clara asked. Evelyn started. Stopped. Her jaw worked. I heard from Mama. About the bank. About... She swallowed. About what happened with the storm. And the cattle. And I needed to... She stopped again. You needed to what? Clara said. Her voice was careful. Not cold, but careful. I needed to see you, Evelyn said. I needed to see with my own eyes that you were all right. And I needed to... She pressed her lips together, and her eyes went bright in the way that Clara had seen 1,000 times. Evelyn, who cried more easily than most people breathed, who had always felt things at the surface rather than carrying them deep the way Clara did. I needed to say I'm sorry. I know sorry isn't... Evie. Clara's voice was quiet. I left you to clean up my mess, Evelyn said. I left you to come here and face a stranger and you could have been hurt in that storm, Clara. You could have... Her voice broke. I did what I always do. I ran from the hard thing and left you to handle it. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The yard was very quiet around them. Clara looked at her sister for a long moment. There were things she could say. She was aware of them, the way you were aware of tools in a box. She could pick any of them up and use them. She could say, you have no idea what I've been through. She could say, you're right. You did leave me to handle it. She could say, do you know what it cost? She could say all of those things, and every one of them would be true. But she looked at her sister, her tired, ashamed, travel-worn sister, who had always been beautiful in ways that Clara could not compete with, and had always felt things in ways that Clara couldn't quite reach, and who had run from a life that would have made her genuinely miserable because she was the kind of person who could not survive without hope, without color, without the belief that something better was possible. And she understood. She understood that Evelyn running had not been an act of cruelty. It had been an act of desperation. And also, and this was the thing she had been sitting with for 14 days, the thing she had turned over and looked at from every angle in the quiet before sleep. Evelyn running had put Clara here, in this yard, in this life. with these people. Come inside, Clara said. Evelyn blinked. You're not... Come inside, Clara said again. May will make you something to eat. You look like you've been on the road for 2 days. 3, Evelyn admitted. Then come inside and eat something and then we'll talk. Clara paused. You're all right, Thomas? Evelyn's expression did something complicated. Thomas is in Denver. We're... She stopped. Then quietly. I'm figuring some things out. Clara nodded. She was not going to push. Not today. She put her hand on her sister's arm. Brief, practical. The kind of touch that meant, come on, rather than I forgive you, even though it also meant that, underneath. And she led her toward the house. Nathan came in for the noon meal to find 2 Whitmore women at his kitchen table. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes went to Clara first. Always, she had noticed, his eyes went to her first. And she gave him a small nod that meant, I'll explain. It's all right. Then he looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at him. This was the moment Clara had not let herself think about. The moment when Nathan Cole would see Evelyn Whitmore for the first time. Beautiful, luminous, magnetic Evelyn, who had been the promised bride, who had been the woman those letters were addressed to, who had been the name at the top of the agreement. Clara watched Nathan's face. He looked at Evelyn with the same direct, assessing attention he gave everything. Then he said, Miss Whitmore, I'm Nathan Cole. I know, Evelyn said. I'm sorry. For everything. What I did to you and to Clara and to... There's no need for that, Nathan said. His voice was even. Not unkind. Just... even. The voice of a man who had already settled the question in his own mind and did not need to revisit it. He crossed to the table and sat down. He looked at Clara. The east section fence needs another look this afternoon, he said. Clara almost smiled. I'll take it after the meal. Nathan nodded. He reached for the bread. Evelyn looked between them. Clara saw the moment her sister understood. The way the understanding moved across her face, like light across water, gradual and then sudden all at once. She saw Evelyn take in the easy familiarity of the exchange. The way Nathan and Clara occupied the same space without negotiation. The way Clara moved in this kitchen with the confidence of someone who belonged here. Evelyn looked at Clara with an expression she had never seen on her sister's face before. Not guilt. Not jealousy. Something quieter than both of those. Something like wonder. Clara, she said softly. Clara met her eyes. You're happy, Evelyn said, as if she was verifying something she hadn't quite believed until she saw it. Clara held her sister's gaze. Yes, she said. Simply, without decoration. The truest one-word answer she had ever given. Evelyn stayed one night. She and Clara talked long after Nathan had gone to his room, sat at the kitchen table with May's leftover coffee and the lamp burning between them, and talked the way sisters talked when they had stopped performing for each other. Evelyn told her about Denver, about Thomas, about the particular shape of the freedom she had chased, and what it had actually felt like when she caught it. She told it honestly, the parts that were good, and the parts that were lonelier than she had expected, and the parts she was still trying to figure out. Clara told her about the 2 weeks. Not all of it. Some things had happened in this kitchen that belonged only to the people who had been in it. But enough. Enough for Evelyn to understand the shape of what had grown here. At one point, Evelyn said, "Were you angry at me when you first arrived?" Clara considered it honestly. "I was scared," she said. "I wasn't sure I was enough." "You were always enough," Evelyn said. "You were always more than enough. You were the one who held everything together and nobody—" She stopped. "Nobody appreciated it the way they should have, including me. Especially me." "Evie, I need you to hear it," Evelyn said. "I need you to know that I saw it, even if I never said it. I always saw how hard you worked and how much you gave and how little came back. I just didn't know how to—" She shook her head. "I never learned to carry things the way you do. I was always trying to find a way around." "I know," Clara said. "I'm not sure that's a virtue," Evelyn said ruefully. It's who you are, Clara said. It brought you somewhere that's making you figure yourself out. That's not nothing. Evelyn looked at her. How are you so... She stopped. How do you do that? Do what? Just accept things. People. As they are. Clara thought about it honestly. I don't know, she said. I think maybe it's because I've spent so long hoping people would accept me as I am. It teaches you something about the other direction. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over Clara's. Held it. Clara held hers back. They sat like that for a while. Two sisters at a kitchen table in Montana. One who had run from a life she didn't want and was finding her way back to something. One who had walked into someone else's life and found that it fit her better than anything she had ever been offered. Evelyn left the next morning. She was going back to Denver. She had things to figure out there, things Clara didn't push on, because Evelyn would figure them out in her own way, in her own time, and pushing had never been the tool that worked with her. They stood in the yard by the wagon, and Evelyn hugged her. A real hug, not a polite one. The kind that meant, I see you, I'm sorry, I love you, thank you. Clara held on for a moment. Then she stepped back. Write to Mama, Clara said. She worries. I will, Evelyn promised. A real promise, Clara could tell. Evelyn climbed up into the wagon. She looked at Clara one more time from that height. He's a good man, she said, quietly, just for Clara. I know, Clara said. Good, Evelyn said. And something in her voice was peace. Genuine peace. The kind you feel when something that was wrong has been set right, even at cost. She drove away. Clara stood and watched until the wagon was gone. Then she turned and walked back toward the ranch. Nathan was standing on the porch. He had been there long enough to have seen Evelyn leave. He said nothing about it. He just looked at Clara as she came toward him, and his face held that expression she had been decoding for 2 weeks. The one she had finally, in the last few days, understood. It wasn't assessment. It wasn't calculation. It was the face of a man looking at the person he trusted most. Trial period ended this morning, he said. I know, she said. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He was standing at the top, which put them at eye level with each other. This tall, quiet, complicated man who had offered her a fair chance when he had every reason to send her away, who had helped with her father's ledger in the lamplight, who had walked away from his own past to stand beside her in a field. I want to ask you something, he said. I know that too, she said. His mouth moved in what was almost a smile. Am I that obvious? May told me, Clara said. He looked past her toward the kitchen window, where May was very visibly not watching. Of course she did, he said. She also told me she's known you for 9 years, and she's seen you like this exactly once, Clara said. So I think that's probably relevant information. Nathan was quiet for a moment. It is, he said. He looked at her. She looked at him. The morning was clear and cold, and the ranch was alive around them with its ordinary sounds and its ordinary demands, and neither of them was pretending they were anywhere else or anyone else. Clara Whitmore, he said. Her name, in his voice, plain and direct and freighted with everything the 2 weeks had built. I'm not a man who makes promises he can't keep. So I'm not going to promise you something poetic, but I can promise you honesty. I can promise you that I will see you, actually see you, every day. I can promise you that whatever this ranch needs, we build it together. Not because of an agreement, because I want to spend the rest of my life working beside you. He paused. And because somewhere in the last 14 days, the idea of you leaving became something I could not make peace with. Clara stood at the bottom of the steps and felt the weight of it. The clean, real weight of being chosen. Not settled for. Not made do with. Chosen. By someone who had seen exactly who she was from the first hour and had kept looking anyway. I want to say something, she said. Then say it, he said. When I arrived here, she said, I told you I would not begin a marriage with a lie. I want you to know that that was the easiest promise I have ever made. Because lying to you... She stopped. I couldn't have done it. From the first minute. I don't fully understand that. I don't know why you were different, but you were. Nathan stepped down off the porch. One step. They were close now. Close enough that she had to look up at him, and close enough that she could see in his face the thing he didn't always let into his voice. Will you marry me? He said. Not because of the agreement. Not because the arrangement requires it. Because we are this. What we are. And I don't want to call it anything less than what it is. Clara looked at him. She thought about the kitchen in Kansas, and the letter, and her mother's face, and the long train ride, and the first morning, and the 2 weeks, and the storm, and the lamplight, and the fence line, and the hand over hers in the supply room. She thought about what she had told Evelyn. I'm happy. Yes, she said. He exhaled. Just that. A quiet exhale, the sound of a man releasing something he had been holding. He reached out and took her hand the same way he had in the supply room. No performance, no drama, just his hand around hers, steady and solid and real. She felt the calloused warmth of it and thought, this is the hand of someone who builds things. This is the hand of someone who stays. Good, he said quietly. Good, she agreed. May's voice came from inside the house. I'm making a proper breakfast, and both of you are going to come inside and eat it before you spend another hour standing in the cold being sentimental about things. Nathan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Nathan. She's been listening this whole time, Clara said. She always has, Nathan said. They went inside. May was already at the stove, her back deliberately turned, her shoulders held in the precise posture of a woman who was not celebrating, but absolutely was. Clara sat down at the kitchen table. Her kitchen table. She set her hands flat on its surface and felt the solidity of it beneath her palms. The worn, worked, real solidity of a table that had been in this house for years, that had held ledgers and letters and late-night calculations, and the quiet, accumulating weight of two people finding their way to each other through honesty and hard work and the willingness to be seen. She pressed her palms flat and felt the table hold. It held. Everything held. The wedding was small. Clara had not wanted anything else, and Nathan had not offered anything else. And that alignment, the way they kept discovering they wanted the same things without having to negotiate toward them, still quietly astonished her every time it happened. May cried. She turned away so nobody would see it, but her shoulders gave her away, and Pete caught Clara's eye from across the room, with a grin that he also tried to hide and failed completely. Walt stood in the back with his hat in his hands, and his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was moved and had absolutely no intention of admitting it. Calloway came with his arm still in a proper splint, and he shook Nathan's hand with his left, and looked at Clara with the steady, direct respect of a man who had been through something real with her, and knew what she was made of because he had watched her make it. The reverend who performed the ceremony was a practical man who kept it brief and true, and when he asked Nathan if he took this woman, Nathan said yes without hesitation and without performance, the way he did everything that mattered. When he asked Clara, she said yes and meant every letter of it. Afterward, May served food at the long kitchen table, more food than Clara had ever seen come out of that kitchen at one time, because May had been cooking in secret for 2 days and had opinions about how celebrations should be conducted. People ate and talked and laughed with the particular ease of people who had been through something hard together and had come out the other side still standing. The ranch hands, who had started the trial period watching Clara with careful skepticism, now moved around her with the comfort of people who had already filed her under, hours. That word, that simple, enormous word, hours. Clara sat at the table and listened to the noise of it and felt something settle in her chest that she did not have a precise name for. Not happiness exactly, though happiness was in it. Not relief, though that was in it too. Something older and quieter. The feeling of arriving somewhere you did not know you were going and recognizing it the moment you got there. Home. The kind that was built rather than born into. 3 months after the wedding, a letter arrived from Evelyn. Clara read it at the kitchen table, early morning, coffee in hand, the way she read everything that required her full attention. Nathan was already in the fields. May was moving around behind her with the comfortable noise of a woman in her element. Evelyn was staying in Denver. She had found work, real work, the kind she was actually suited for, using the brightness and warmth and gift for making people believe in things that had always been her most genuine skill. She was teaching a small school. She loved it. She sounded, Clara thought, like herself. Like the real version of herself, not the performance of herself that she had been running in Kansas all those years. The beautiful younger daughter being careful and charming and strategic about a future she was quietly terrified of. She sounded free. At the end of the letter, Evelyn had written, "I think about you every day, Clara. I think about what you walked into and what you built from it. I always knew you were the strongest one. I just didn't know that strength could look like belonging." Clara set the letter down. She pressed her lips together and looked at a point on the wall for a long moment. May set a fresh cup of coffee beside her without being asked. "Good news?" May said. "Yes," Clara said. "Evelyn is well." "Good." May paused. "And?" Clara looked up at her. "And she says she thinks I'm the strongest one." May made a sound. Short, decisive. The sound of a woman confirming something she has known for a long time. "Well," she said. "She's not wrong." Clara looked back at the letter. "She never told me that before," Clara said quietly. "When we were growing up, she never... People say the things they should have said earlier when they finally understand what it costs the other person not to hear them," May said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, the way May's voice always was when she was saying something important. "Better late than never. File it away and let it mean what it means." Clara nodded slowly. She folded the letter. She held it for a moment. The paper, the words, the handwriting that looked like Evelyn sounded, light and slightly rushed and more honest than she used to let herself be. Then she set it in the box where she kept the letters from home, which was already starting to feel less like a lifeline and more like a record of a life that was fully her own. The real twist came 6 months into the marriage, and nobody saw it coming. Not even Clara. She had been feeling off for 3 weeks. Tired in a way that was different from work tired. The bone-deep exhaustion she understood and could manage. This was something else. A tiredness that started before the day did and didn't lift the way it was supposed to. She had been ignoring it with the same disciplined stubbornness she applied to everything she didn't have time to examine, until May sat her down in the kitchen on a Thursday morning, poured 2 cups of coffee, and put her hands flat on the table. "I need you to stop working for 5 minutes, May said. "I'm not..." "Clara." She stopped. May looked at her with the calm, knowing patience of a woman who had been paying attention for 6 months in the way that May paid attention to everything. Quietly, completely, filing away every small detail until the picture was clear enough to act on. "How long?" May said. Clara looked at her. She understood the question immediately. Understood it in the way she had been not understanding it for 3 weeks, refusing to let the thought form fully because full thoughts required action, and she hadn't been ready. 6 weeks, she said. Maybe 7. May nodded, just nodded, as if Clara had confirmed what she already knew. "You need to tell Nathan," May said. Clara pressed her palms flat on the table. She felt the solid, familiar surface of it beneath her hands. She had been doing that since the morning after the engagement, pressing her palms to this table to feel it hold. "I will," she said. "Today," May said. "Today," Clara agreed. She sat for a moment longer. Then she stood up, squared her shoulders the way she had squared her shoulders on a train platform in Kansas 6 months ago, and walked out to find her husband. She found him in the barn. He heard her come in and looked up from what he was doing, and something in his face immediately shifted. That alert attention, reading her the way he had been reading her since the first day. He had gotten even better at it in 6 months. Or she had gotten more legible. She wasn't sure which. "What's wrong?" he said. "Nothing's wrong," she said. He looked at her, waiting. "Nathan." She stopped. She had been planning what to say since she left the kitchen, and every version she had rehearsed felt wrong. Too formal, too careful, too managed. She discarded all of them. I think we're going to need to expand the house." He stared at her. She watched him process it. The slow, careful processing of a man, making sure he understood before he responded. She watched the exact moment he understood. His face did something she had never seen it do before. It opened. Completely, totally opened. Every careful containment he maintained, every disciplined quietness, every controlled steadiness, all of it dissolved for one unguarded moment, and what was underneath was something so raw and genuine and unhidden that Clara felt her throat tighten immediately. He crossed the barn in 3 steps and put his hands on her face. Both hands this time, not the brief checking gesture from the storm, but something deliberate and tender. And he looked at her at close range with that wide-open expression that she would carry for the rest of her life as the most honest thing she had ever seen on a human face. "Clara," he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "I'm well," she said quickly. "I'm healthy. We're going to need more room is all." He pressed his forehead to hers. She felt him breathe. They stood like that in the barn for a long moment. His hands on her face, her hands come up to hold his wrists, both of them still. Not talking, not needing to. Then he pulled back enough to look at her again. "You're not scared?" he said. "Terrified," she said. "You?" "Yes," he said immediately. No hesitation, no pretending, just yes. She almost laughed. A small, warm, genuinely surprised laugh. "Good. We can be terrified together." His mouth curved. The real smile, the one she had been collecting since the first week. Rare and unperformative and entirely his. "Together," he said. Like it was a word he was still getting used to. Like it was a word he had needed for a long time and was only now learning to use without being careful around it. "Together," Clara said. The months that followed were the fullest of her life. Not the easiest. Full. The distinction mattered, because Clara had spent enough years confusing difficulty with meaninglessness to understand that the two were not related. The hard things on the ranch were hard in the way that real things were hard, demanding, honest, costly, and worth it. She kept the supply operation running. She maintained the accounts. She negotiated with suppliers and managed seasonal planning and made decisions that needed to be made fast because the ranch didn't pause for anyone's hesitation. She did all of it while her body changed and her capacity for early mornings occasionally wavered, and May watched her with an eagle eye that Clara pretended not to notice and was privately grateful for every single day. Nathan never once treated her like something fragile. That was the thing she hadn't known she needed until she had it. She had expected, somewhere in the buried part of her, the part shaped by a lifetime of being handled as though her usefulness was the only interesting thing about her. She had expected that something would shift when she became visibly, undeniably, a woman building something inside her body. That she would become less in someone's eyes. Less capable, less relevant, less worth consulting. Nathan consulted her more, not because he thought she needed the dignity of being included. Because he genuinely wanted her input. Because 6 months of working beside her had made her judgment something he relied on, the same way he relied on the weather signs he had learned over 12 years. Not just useful, but trusted. Built into the way he operated. One evening he came in from the fields with a proposal from a neighboring rancher who wanted to purchase the eastern section of the property. A significant amount of money. A significant loss of land. He sat down across from her at this table. He said, "Tell me what you think." Not, "I've made a decision." Not, "I wanted to let you know." Not even, "What's your opinion?" the way someone asks when they want confirmation rather than assessment. "Tell me what you think." Clara looked at the numbers he spread in front of her. She looked at the map. She asked 3 questions and listened to his answers and spent 10 minutes working through the figures in the margin of the page. "Don't sell," she said. "Why?" "Because the eastern section is where the water runs best in a dry year. You sell that land and you're fine for the next 5 years and exposed in the 6th. If we make it through 3 more good seasons with the cost savings from the billing supplier, We can pay off the banknote without sacrificing the land. It's a slower path, but it's the one that doesn't leave us vulnerable." She looked up. "That's my read." Nathan looked at the numbers for another moment. "That's my read too," he said. "I wanted to know if I was missing something." Clara looked at him steadily. "You weren't missing anything. You've been running this ranch for 12 years. Your instincts are sound." "So are yours," he said. She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "They are." She said it without apology, without qualification, without the habitual deflection she had spent 26 years reaching for automatically. She said it like a fact, because it was one. Nathan looked at her with that expression, the one she had decoded months ago, the one she saw now every day in 100 small moments, and she understood again what it meant to be truly seen by someone who had no interest in seeing anything other than what was actually there. The baby came in the spring. Walt held the door when the doctor arrived and stood outside it for 2 hours with his hat in his hands, which was the most visible he had ever been in an emotional situation, and which Clara, when May told her about it later, found so perfectly, characteristically Walt, that she laughed until her eyes watered. Pete apparently cried, openly and without embarrassment, which surprised no one who knew Pete. Nathan did not leave the room. He had asked, carefully, if Clara wanted him there, and she had said yes without thinking about it because the answer was immediate and clear. Of course, yes, here, with me. Where else would you be? He held her hand with the same steady, solid grip he had offered over her father's ledger 6 months before their wedding, and he did not flinch, and he did not look away. And when it was over, and Clara held their daughter for the first time, a small, red-faced, furious, perfect thing who announced herself to the world with considerable volume, Nathan put his hand on Clara's hair and pressed his lips to her forehead and did not say anything. "I didn't need to. They named her Ruth. May said it was a good, strong name. Walt said nothing, but he carved a small horse from wood and left it outside the nursery door without signing it, which Clara discovered 3 days later, and which was one of the finest things anyone had done for her in years. A year after Ruth was born, Dora Hatch came to call again. This time she did not arrive with the assessing, slightly superior energy she had carried on that first visit. She arrived the way people arrived at the coal ranch once they understood what it was, with respect, with genuine intention, with the adjusted posture of a woman who had revised her original assessment. Clara was in the yard when the wagon came. Ruth was on her hip, a solid, bright-eyed 1-year-old who looked at the world with the same direct, unafraid attention her father had and her mother had, and which May declared, with satisfaction, was simply the coal ranch way of looking at things now. Dora climbed down and looked at Clara. She looked at Ruth. Something crossed her face. Real, unguarded. The kind of thing that happens when you see something and it rearranges something you thought was settled. "Mrs. Cole," she said. "Mrs. Hatch," Clara said. Dora stood in front of her for a moment. Then, "I owe you an apology, from when I came the first time." Clara looked at her evenly. "You don't—" "I judged you," Dora said, "before I knew you. I came here that day to see what the replacement bride was like, and I decided before I stepped down from the wagon." She paused. "I was wrong. I've known I was wrong for a year. I wanted to say so to your face." Clara looked at her. She thought about that first day. The work gloves, the axle grease on her sleeve, the deliberate choice not to apologize for how she looked. She thought about the distance she had traveled since then, and the things she had built, and the person she had become in the building. "I appreciate that," she said simply. She meant it. "Nathan is a different man," Dora said, "since you came." She said it carefully, like she was placing something fragile down. "Happier. More—" She searched for the word. "More present." Clara shifted Ruth on her hip. "He was always a good man," she said. "He just needed someone to stay." Dora looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose that's true of most of us." Clara invited her inside. May made coffee. Dora Hatch stayed for 2 hours and left as something closer to a friend than she had arrived. That was the Cole Ranch. That was what it had become. A place where people arrived with their assumptions and left having reconsidered them. Not because anyone insisted on it, just because of what lived there, what had been built there, what two people with rough hands and honest intentions had made out of an arrangement that everyone had expected to fail. Years later, people across the Montana Territory told the story of Nathan Cole and Clara Whitmore. They got some of it wrong, the way people always got stories wrong. Embellished the storm, simplified the trial period, made the sisters' departure more dramatic than it was. But they got the important part right. They got the part about a woman who arrived as someone's replacement and became, instead, irreplaceable. The woman who told the truth when lying would have been easier, who held a broken man up through a storm, who pressed her palms to a kitchen table and felt it hold. Nathan told Ruth the story when Ruth was old enough to understand it. He sat with her in the kitchen, that table, and told her how her mother had stepped off a train in Montana with nothing but honesty and a willingness to work, and how he had offered a 2-week trial expecting very little, and how everything he had expected had been wrong in the best possible way. Ruth listened with her chin in her hands and her mother's direct, unafraid eyes. "Were you scared?" Ruth asked. "Terrified," Nathan said. "Both of us." "But you did it anyway." "Your mother did it first," he said. "I just made sure to keep up." Ruth thought about this. "That's what Mama always says," she said. "She says the bravest thing you can do is show up as yourself and refuse to apologize for it." Nathan looked at his daughter, this small, solid, bright-eyed person who had his quietness and her mother's certainty, and the particular, unhurried confidence of a child who had grown up in a house where she was seen, and he felt the full weight of everything that had been built here. Not just the land, not just the ranch, not just the ledgers and the fence lines, and the 20% cost savings, and the banknote that had long since been paid off. All of it. Clara came in from outside, her hands cold from the morning air, her boots tracking mud the way they had been tracking mud since the first week. She looked at the two of them at the table and read the conversation in their faces, the way she read everything important, quickly, accurately, without needing to be told. She pulled up a chair and sat down. She pressed her palms flat on the table and felt it hold. "What are we talking about?" she said. "You," Nathan said. She looked at him. He looked at her. And in the space between them was everything. The train platform, the kitchen at 5 in the morning, the storm and the ravine, and the lamplight, and the hand over hers in the supply room, and every morning since, and every morning that was still coming. "Tell me something I don't know," she said. "You are the first choice," he said. "You were always the first choice. The story just took its time getting there." Clara held his gaze. The kitchen was warm. Ruth was watching them with her chin in her hands. Outside, the ranch was alive with its ordinary sounds. The livestock, the wind, the particular rhythm of a life built by people who had chosen each other every single day and intended to keep choosing. Clara pressed her palms to the table. It held. It had always held. And that, all of that, every last piece of it, was entirely, completely